You ever move somewhere thinking it's just a fresh start, some quiet place to reset your life, and then realize the house has its own rules? I thought I'd left ghosts behind when I left my old life, but that was before I found the note in the kitchen drawer, before the knocking started. I grabbed the last box from the truck bed and hefted it against my hip. The cardboard had gone soft after 3 days of loading and unloading, and the weight shifted as I carried it up the gravel path toward my new front door. The white clapboard house sat quiet under the fading afternoon sun. 2 stories, green shutters, a wraparound porch that needed some love. 3 acres of mostly wood stretched out behind it. Not bad for what I could afford after the divorce. I stepped inside and set the box down with the rest. My back ached, but this was it. Everything I owned now fit in one pickup load. Funny how 15 years of marriage could shrink down to so little. The house felt bigger once my things were inside. Christine Burke, the previous owner, had left most of the furniture behind. A brown couch with threadbare arms, a coffee table marked with water rings, a kitchen set with 4 mismatched chairs. Even the dishes and pots were still in the cupboards. Her family must have wanted to be done with it all. I wandered room to room, taking it in. The floors creaked underfoot, and tall windows let in a soft light that shifted with every gust of wind. The kitchen was small but workable. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub waited. Remote, quiet, and close enough to town for groceries, perfect for getting my freelance writing business started, without Ellie's voice in my head telling me I was wasting my time. By sundown, I was unpacked enough to feel settled. I set my laptop on the kitchen table where I could look out over the woods while I worked. When I got to the kitchen boxes, I realized Christine had left plenty of old dishes and silverware. I opened the drawer by the sink, which stuck a little before sliding open. Inside, rubber bands, screws, and a folded piece of white paper tucked in the back. It read, "House rules" in neat cursive, the kind they used to teach in schools. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. Do not open windows after midnight. If the phone rings between 2 and 3 in the morning, do not answer. If you hear voices calling your name from outside after dark, do not look out or go outside. If you hear crying from the basement, leave immediately and return only at daylight. I laughed softly. Poor Christine. Probably watched too many old horror films. Still, I hesitated before tossing it. Something about the way it was written, careful, deliberate, made me slide it into the junk drawer instead. That night, I fell asleep fast. The house groaned around me like old bones settling. The banging started at 3:17 in the morning. The pounding jolted me awake, my heart slamming against my ribs. At first, I thought it might have been something falling over downstairs, a box shifting in the dark. But no, this was deliberate. Someone or something was hammering on the front door. I checked my phone, 3:17. Who the hell comes knocking at a place like this in the middle of the night? I swung my legs out of bed and listened. The sound kept coming, steady, rhythmic, not frantic, not panicked. Aggressive, almost commanding, like it wanted me to answer, and it wouldn't stop until I did. My pulse raced as I crept to the bedroom door, careful not to make the floorboards creak. The banging echoed louder now, vibrating through the floorboards and walls. I considered calling the police, but something told me to hold off. The rules Christine had left, maybe they weren't nonsense after all. I moved slowly, sticking to the parts of the stairs that groaned the least. Each step seemed to stretch forever. The pounding increased, heavier, more insistent. 4 sharp knocks, a pause, 4 more, over and over. Whoever it was had strength and maybe something more, because it didn't feel human. Halfway down, I stopped, listening. The house creaked in its usual ways, but the knocks were different. Purposeful, testing me, maybe measuring me. I edged across the living room, careful to avoid the old coffee table and the couch left behind by Christine. My stomach tightened. The door loomed ahead, shadowed and silent between the yellowed glow of the porch light I'd forgotten to turn on. Then it stopped. Silence. Only my breathing filled the room. My skin prickled. I crept toward the door, pressed my eye to the old wavy glass. Darkness. Empty porch. No shadow, no footprints, nothing moving, and that's when it hit me. The first rule. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. My hand shook as I reached for the switch, flipping it upward. A warm yellow glow spilled across the porch, illuminating the steps and driveway. The trees behind the house still swayed in the wind, but nothing stirred. I pressed my forehead to the glass again. Nobody. The light had probably driven them or it off. I stayed for 10 more minutes, watching, waiting, listening to the night hum. My phone read 3:28 when I finally stepped back. Whoever or whatever was out there had gone, at least for now. I wanted to check the yard to make sure, but the fourth rule came back, sharp and clear: do not go outside or look out windows if voices call after dark. The principle applied: stay inside when the night turned strange. I went back upstairs, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling. My heart refused to calm. The house creaked and moaned like always, but no more pounding came. Sleep came reluctantly. My first night had ended with a reminder. The rules weren't just old-fashioned advice, they were instructions for surviving this place, and I intended to follow them. By morning, I tried to convince myself it had been some prank local kids, maybe drunk, thinking it'd be funny. But stepping onto the porch, mug of coffee in hand, the scratches in the doorframe told me otherwise. Deep, parallel gouges in the white wood, fresh and raw, clawed by something enormous. I traced them lightly. No dog, no person could have done this. This house had rules, and they had already begun testing me. I stared at the scratches, my fingers hovering over the raw wood. 5 parallel gouges on each side of the doorframe, deep and deliberate. My stomach sank. This wasn't a prank, not a local kid, not a drunken neighbor. Nothing human had made these marks. I pulled my hand back slowly, letting the cool morning air fill my lungs. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft light over the 3 acres of woods behind the house. Birds sang, leaves rustled in the breeze, and the house looked as ordinary as it had when I first arrived. Yet, I couldn't shake the image of those gouges, the memory of pounding on the door in the dead of night. I set my coffee down on the porch railing and ran a hand through my hair. Christine's rules came back to me, clear and insistent. Porch light, windows, phone, voices, crying, each one a lifeline, each one a line I couldn't cross if I wanted to survive. I decided to check the rest of the house, methodically. Every room, every window, every floorboard I could see. Everything seemed normal. Christine's furniture old but sturdy. Her kitchen utensils scattered yet functional. Even the basement door, sitting quietly by the back entrance, betrayed nothing. It was almost comforting, almost. But the scratches on the door told a different story. I realized then that the rules weren't just quirks or obsessions, they were survival tactics. Christine had lived here 40 years. 40 years of scratches, knocks, voices, and unexplained cries. Her rules weren't superstition, they were knowledge gained the hard way. I folded that thought over in my mind, letting it sink. After breakfast, I tried to shake off the lingering unease. I unpacked the last boxes in the kitchen, arranging the dishes and silverware, placing pots and pans on hooks and counters. Routine calmed me, grounded me, kept my mind from wandering back to the night's terror. Still, every time I glanced at the front door, the scratches seemed to move slightly, like shadows stretched across the white paint. Mid-morning, I went outside to inspect the backyard. 3 acres of mostly woods, with patches of sunlight breaking through the trees. It was peaceful, almost idyllic, and yet I couldn't help imagining something or someone watching from between the trunks. The grass was patchy, a mixture of dead earth and green shoots just starting to return after winter. I decided I'd start small, maybe a garden, some flowers. Something to occupy my mind, to reclaim some normalcy. By noon, I had cleared a small patch near the back door. The act of digging, pulling weeds, and breaking up clumps of soil grounded me. Every scoop of dirt reminded me that this was my space now, and for now, I could control it. But the memory of the night stayed close, lurking at the edges of thought. As I set down the shovel, I noticed something odd in the soil footprints. Not small, not human. Wide, heavy impressions in the damp earth, leading from the edge of the woods toward the house. My chest tightened. Christine's 4th rule: don't respond if voices call after dark. That had saved her, and now, in a subtle, frightening way, it saved me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded myself: observe, follow the rules, survive. And for now, I would respect them. I started to think maybe I'd been lucky. Maybe whatever had been testing me those first few nights had moved on. The scratches on the door frame were still there, and the footprints in the dirt returned after rain, but nothing new had happened. 2 weeks of normal life can make you question a lot of things. I'd wake up, make coffee, work on my articles, eat dinner, watch Christine's old TV, and go to bed. Routine. The kind that makes weird memories feel like bad dreams. Still, I followed the rules, every single one. Christine had written them down carefully. Better safe than sorry. That afternoon, I decided to tackle the backyard. The grass was mostly dead, with patches of decent soil near the house. My old friend Elise had always said I should try gardening. At our previous apartment, I had no space, but here, 3 acres waited. Most of it was woods, but the area directly behind the house got sunlight. I drove to the hardware store and picked up a small shovel, a hand rake, and packets of fast-growing seeds. I'd start small. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, simple. The weather was warm for early spring, the sun bright enough that I didn't need a jacket. I chose a spot about 20 feet from the back door and began digging. Turning over dirt, pulling weeds, breaking up clumps with the rake, it felt good. Physical work that didn't demand thinking. I'd been at it for about an hour when I heard it. "Ashton!" Behind me, maybe 50 yards away. I froze, chest tight. It sounded like Elise, the tone familiar, yet something else undercut it. A playful, almost musical quality, like someone coaxing a dog. Elise never talked that way. Not once in 15 years of marriage. "I need to show you something," the voice called. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears. Christine's 4th rule echoed in my mind: do not go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. Technically, it wasn't dark yet, but the intent was clear. Ignore it. The voice shifted, almost childlike, playful, impatient. "Why won't you answer me?" it sang. I focused on the seeds, covering each gently, row by row. Lettuce, small and delicate. The voice quickened, bouncing through the trees. "Come and see, Ashton. I have something special for you." It sounded hurt now, then angry, sharp with frustration. "You're no fun, Ashton. No fun at all." My hand shook slightly as I dropped the last seeds into the earth. The sun was near the horizon. I gathered my tools, keeping my back to the trees. "I'll wait for you, Ashton," the voice called softly now, patient again. I stepped inside, closing the back door, turning the deadbolt. Curtains went up, porch light on. The singing faded but remained faint, echoing. I made dinner, trying to ignore it. The day had been normal sunlight, dirt under my nails, but the house reminded me of its rules. Safety came from respecting them. Christine had left me a roadmap. That night I realized something crucial. The rules weren't paranoia, they were survival instructions. I'd been in the house 3 weeks when I first heard the crying. I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, working on an article about sustainable farming practices. The deadline loomed, but I needed coffee more than focus. Then it started, soft at first, so quiet I thought it might be the old pipes, but it wasn't. It was real. Human. A woman, sobbing, broken, full of fear. My hands froze over the keyboard. The sound drifted from somewhere below down in the basement. Instinct screamed at me to go help. But Christine's 5th rule burned in my mind. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. I swallowed, torn. What if it was a real person? What if someone had been hurt? I tried to reason with myself. The scratches on my doorframe. The footprints outside. The ringing phone when unplugged. Christine hadn't written those rules out of fear. She had survived 40 years in this house following them. The crying could be anything. It grew louder as I approached the basement door. The sobs sounded like they knew I was listening, like they wanted me to react. My hands shook as I reached for the handle, then pulled back. The rational side of me argued. The survival side reminded me of Christine's wisdom. I grabbed my car keys. Every sob echoed through the floorboards, following my steps around the kitchen. I kept moving toward the door. The crying intensified, urgent, desperate. Whoever or whatever was down there didn't want me to leave, didn't want me to follow the rules. I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The sound persisted, climbing through the floor like it was alive, tracking me across the porch. My pulse raced. I climbed into the truck, started the engine. Even there, the sobbing followed. It pierced the early morning air as I drove 15 minutes into Millbrook, the little town where I shopped. At the Pine Rest Motel, I got a room, nothing fancy. Just 4 walls, a bed, a sink. The crying didn't reach me here. I sank onto the scratchy bedspread, staring at the paneling and wondering what might have happened if I'd gone downstairs. I thought about Christine and her rules. She had lived with this house for decades, surviving whatever lurked in the woods, whatever haunted the basement. She'd learned when to act, when to retreat. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the sobbing. It sounded human, real. Part of me wanted to run back to confront it, but another part remembered the rules. Christine had lived here 40 years. Rules kept her alive. They would keep me alive. Morning arrived, pale light creeping through the motel window. I forced myself to leave, drove back to the house around 8. Everything looked peaceful, normal. The porch, the yard, the quiet woods. I stepped inside. Basement silent, empty. Old concrete, stone walls, furnace, water heater, boxes untouched. No signs anyone had been down there. Nothing. No traces, no footprints, no evidence of what had been crying. Just a quiet, empty basement. And that's when it hit me. Christine wasn't crazy. The rules weren't nonsense. She had survived because she understood how to respect this house and what lived in it. Following them wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Standing at the kitchen table, I stared at Christine's list of rules taped to the refrigerator. 5 simple instructions, yet everyone now carried weight I hadn't imagined. Keep the porch light on. Don't open windows after midnight. Don't answer the phone between 2 and 3. Don't respond to voices calling your name after dark. Leave immediately if there's crying in the basement. All of them made sense now. Each was a boundary, a line drawn in the sand. I thought about the porch light incident, the pounding at 3:17. I remembered my heart hammering, my hands shaking. I remembered the doorframe scratches the next morning, deep claw marks that couldn't belong to any animal. Christine hadn't been paranoid. She'd been observant, cautious, precise. Sitting at the table, coffee in hand, I ran a finger along the worn paper. 40 years. She had spent 40 years in this house, surviving the inexplicable. The family probably thought she'd lost touch with reality. Moving her to the nursing home must have felt right to them. But Christine had survived. She had mastered this place. I realized that the supernatural occurrences weren't random. They had rules, too. They waited, they tested, they watched, but they respected limits if I did. The crying, the scratching, the voices, even the unexplainable phone calls. They were all tests, subtle and relentless. I thought about the basement. I had followed the 5th rule. Left. Come morning, nothing remained. That was the proof. The house was quiet that morning, calm as ever. The morning sun fell across the floorboards. Birds called in the trees behind the house. I brewed another cup of coffee and sat down at Christine's old kitchen table, laptop open. My article about sustainable farming waited. I realized then how strange my life had become, writing about crop rotation and soil health while living in a house where the real protection was a set of rules written in careful cursive. Irony wasn't lost on me. I looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard. My small garden patch where I had started planting caught the early light. The tomato seeds had probably sprouted by now. My hands itched to check, but I reminded myself, Rule 4, voices might call, even in the light. Stay focused, stay safe. The day passed like this, quietly. I wrote my article, answered emails, and managed to finish the piece without interruption. No scratching, no tapping, no crying, just the normal sounds of an old house settling around me. By 5 o'clock, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Sunlight slanted through the windows, warm and golden. 6:15, porch light time. I walked to the front door and flipped the switch. The yellow light spread across the boards and steps, pushing shadows back into corners. Rule 1, most important. Keep it burning from sunset to sunrise. I'd learned that lesson the hard way on my first night here. I ate dinner quietly, watching the trees sway in the evening wind. I thought about calling friends, my editor, maybe even my ex, just to share how bizarre yet controlled my life had become. But what could I say? That I was safe because I obeyed a set of supernatural instructions left by a previous tenant. They'd think I was losing my mind. This was my world, my private arrangement, and I would respect it. The rules worked, and I intended to follow them to the letter. Christine's wisdom had given me that gift, safety, peace. A fragile, controlled life among chaos. I understood now. The next morning, I walked out into the backyard with a cup of coffee, taking in the quiet. The grass was brown and patchy, but the sun warmed the soil just enough to make planting seem possible. I decided to start a small garden here, a bit of normality in a place where the supernatural lurked in every shadow. A small patch of dirt, a few seeds, some careful rows. It felt grounding. I drove to the hardware store in town, picking up a small shovel, hand rake, and some seed packets. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, easy, fast-growing crops. I wanted simple wins, not something that would require me to obsess. Back home, I picked a sunny spot about 20 feet from the back door. The soil was soft, forgiving, and I dug with methodical, repetitive movements. Turn over the dirt, pull weeds, break clumps. My back ached pleasantly from the work. It was then that I heard it. My name, soft at first, carried across the yard from the edge of the woods. "Ashton!" A woman's voice, high, clear, but not Ellie's. The tone was strange, playful, musical, almost teasing. I froze, trowel in hand. It was impossible, right? Ellie lived 2 states away. She wouldn't be standing out here calling me like a game. "Ashton, come here, I need to show you something." I didn't move. Christine's fourth rule hit me instantly. Do not go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. Technically, it was daytime, but the spirit of the rule applied. Don't respond. The voice grew playful, sing-song, bouncing around the trees. Why won't you answer me, Ashton? It sounded disappointed, hurt, yet beneath that was an undertone of amusement, like it expected me to play along. I returned to the dirt, planting tomato seeds carefully in neat rows, patting the soil down. I'm not going to you, I whispered to myself, though the words felt foolish. The voice called again, closer, sharper now. Come play with me. I'll wait all day if I have to. It moved between the edge of the woods, coming from different directions, echoing off trees. I kept my back turned, focused on the seeds, covering them with loose dirt. My hands shook slightly despite my effort to stay calm. Lettuce seeds next, smaller, requiring precision. The voice shifted, childlike now, pleading, sorrowful. I'm lonely. Come keep me company. I forced myself to ignore it, finishing the lettuce row, then moving to carrots. The sun was lower in the sky, about 45 minutes from sunset. The voice persisted, cycling between playful, frustrated, and hurt tones. I covered the carrot seeds and planted green beans last, bigger seeds that were easier to space. Finally, the sun touched the horizon. Porch light soon. I gathered the seed packets, shovel and rake, keeping my back to the woods. The voice followed, singing my name in a rhythm that sounded almost hypnotic, bouncing off the trees. Come play with me, Ashton. I'll wait. I reached the back door, fumbled with the handle, my hand shaking. The singing was right at the edge of the trees. I stepped inside, locking the door, pulling curtains closed. The sound faded to a distant, faint rhythm. I knew I had followed the rule. I had survived. Christine's rules worked again. The backyard lay silent, peaceful. The seeds rested in neat rows, and I felt the strange comfort of knowing the boundaries I respected were also respected in return. I had been in the house for 3 weeks when it happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, trying to finish an article about sustainable farming practices. My coffee mug steamed beside me, the morning sun spilling over the counter. I was deep in thought, fingers poised over the keys, when I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, a woman crying. I froze, heart tightening. It wasn't pipes or the old furnace. It was human. Broken, desperate sobbing that echoed faintly from below. The basement. Every instinct screamed at me to run down and check to see if someone needed help. But Christine's fifth rule returned to my mind like a cold wind. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. I stood slowly, swallowing the lump in my throat. The sound rose, more urgent, and I could tell it was a woman in serious distress. Part of me wanted to scream back, to call out, but the rules were clear. Do not engage. Survival depended on following the instructions, not questioning them. I moved away from the basement door and grabbed my car keys. The crying seemed to follow me through the kitchen, bouncing off walls, rising and falling with intensity. It was so human, so real that it made my chest ache. I could hear the sorrow in every broken sob, feel it in my stomach. But I forced myself to walk toward the front door. I locked the door behind me, the sobbing now muffled through the wood, yet still persistent. It followed me to the truck as if pleading, begging for attention, for comfort. My hand shook as I slid into the driver's seat. I drove to Millbrook, 15 minutes away, to the Pine Rest Motel. Nothing fancy, but safe, clean. I told the clerk I had locked myself out and needed a room until the locksmith arrived. She gave me a strange look, but accepted my explanation. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the crying returned, echoing in my mind, hauntingly vivid. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I returned home. The house looked calm, normal. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, cautious. The kitchen and living room were silent. The basement, too. Concrete floors, stone walls, the furnace humming gently. Nothing disturbed. No signs of anyone having been there. The boxes, the paint cans, everything untouched. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Christine's house rules taped to the refrigerator. 5 simple instructions. 5 rules that had kept her safe for decades. I understood now. Christine had lived with this for 40 years, navigating the strange, dangerous boundaries of a world most people didn't even notice. Her family had assumed she was confused or delusional. She was, in reality, a master of survival. The crying from last night had been a test. And I had passed. By following the rule, by leaving immediately, the house remained calm, undisturbed. It was proof, undeniable, that her methods worked. I could feel a strange gratitude, a respect for the careful instructions she had left behind. They weren't superstitions. They were life-saving guidelines, hard-earned and precise. I sat there, coffee growing cold, absorbing the weight of her wisdom. The house stayed quiet, a sanctuary that worked only if I respected its rules. I understood now that this place, terrifying and mysterious, had boundaries, and as long as I stayed within them, I was safe. The next few days were quiet, almost unnervingly so. I spent my mornings working at the kitchen table, typing articles and answering emails, the backyard stretching beyond the tall windows like a green ocean. The sunlight felt warm and ordinary, but I knew better than to assume safety came naturally. Christine's rules were clear: ignore the strange, respect the boundaries, survive. I decided to focus on understanding them completely, breaking each rule down in my mind, keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. That had saved me the first night. I made a habit of checking it every evening, ensuring the yellow glow spilled across the wooden boards and steps. Do not open windows after midnight. Simple enough, but now I understood it wasn't about the wind or cold. Something might tap, might watch, and the windows gave it a line of sight. I would not give it that advantage. The third rule, about the phone between 2 and 3 a.m., still seemed strange, but I followed it without hesitation, the ringing that had haunted my first week, lingering in memory. Now, whenever I heard it during the forbidden hour, I stared at it, calm, and let it ring. It always stopped. Always. Rule 4 was the one that tested me most in the early days. Voices calling my name after dark. I had heard them and ignored them. A playful sing-song voice that sounded like Ellie, a voice that twisted into hurt, anger, and insistence, bouncing between the trees and following me through the yard. I had planted seeds, tended my small garden, and never turned to look. My palms remembered the tremor of those moments, the magnetic pull of curiosity. The rule had kept me safe, and I knew I had no choice but to respect it. The 5th rule haunted me most, crying from the basement. I had experienced it once, a test that nearly made me break the rule out of instinct. The anguish had felt so human, so real, that leaving the house had been almost unbearable. But the proof of her wisdom was undeniable. Come morning, the basement was empty. Nothing moved, nothing disturbed. The agreement had held. I spent hours wandering the house during the day, checking every corner, familiarizing myself with the layout, understanding how sounds traveled and shadows formed. I wanted to feel competent here, to master the environment Christine had survived in for 40 years. Every creak, every groan of the floorboards I cataloged in my mind. The patterns mattered, the rules mattered. The house wasn't a home without them. Evenings were the hardest. The sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretching across the yard. The wind picked up in the trees, stirring leaves and branches. Sometimes I thought I heard faint tapping or scratching or a low sigh drifting through the air. I reminded myself of the rules, turned on the porch light, locked every door and window, and stayed calm. Following them had become instinct, like breathing. By the end of the week, I realized something important. I wasn't just surviving here, I was thriving. My work was productive, my garden was growing, and my understanding of the house deepened daily. The strange world outside the walls didn't control me. I respected it, obeyed its rules, and in return, it left me in peace. Christine had not left the haunted house. She had left a system, a method, a way to live with the inexplicable. I could do this. I could live here safely, as long as I remembered her lessons. I started to think maybe I'd gotten lucky. Maybe whatever had tested me in the first few nights had moved on. The scratches on the door frame were still there, the footprints in the dirt reappearing after rain, but nothing new had happened. 2 weeks of quiet life made me question my own memories, wondering if I'd imagined the banging or the ringing phone. Routine helped: morning coffee, work at the table, small meals, Christine's old TV for background noise at night, the kind of life that numbed fear into forgetfulness. Still, I followed the rules to the letter, every single one. Better safe than sorry. I decided to try something normal, something human. The backyard had been mostly dead grass when I arrived. A small patch near the house received enough sun for gardening. Ellie had always wanted me to try it, and now I had space. I drove to town, bought a small shovel, a hand rake, and some packets of fast-growing seeds. Tomatoes, lettuce, carrots, Sybil stuff. The afternoon was warm for early spring, sunlight soft on the porch boards as I dug the first rows. Physical work felt good, grounding. Pulling weeds, loosening soil, raking clumps. It reminded me of life beyond writing, deadlines, and walls that sometimes felt like they closed in. I was about an hour in when I heard it, Ashton. The voice came from the woods somewhere 50 yards away. I froze. It sounded like Ellie, the tone familiar, the way she'd say my name. But it carried something else, playful, almost musical, like someone coaxing a pet to come. Ellie had never spoken that way. She was direct, no coaxing, no sing-song tones. "I need to show you something," the voice said, high, clear, teasing. I kept digging, planting tomatoes, ignoring it. "Ashton, come here," it repeated, bouncing among the trees. Each word pulled at me, testing my focus. Christine's fourth rule flashed in my mind. Do not go outside or look out windows if voices call your name after dark. Technically, it was still daytime, but the principle applied. The voice grew impatient, hurt, playful. "Why won't you answer me?" It bounced from left to right, closer, retreating, almost laughing in rhythm. My hands shook, but I planted the lettuce seeds anyway, careful with spacing. Then the carrots. The voice changed again, sad, a small child pleading. I ignored it, focusing on the task. Sunlight dipped lower, 45 minutes to sunset. The green beans went in last, bigger seeds, easier to handle. "Come play, Ashton." "Come and play." The words repeated, a musical chant echoing through the woods, playful, almost hypnotic. I finished, collected the tools, keeping my back to the trees. The sun touched the horizon. Time to go in. The voice followed me, fading slowly, still chanting softly. "I'll wait for you, Ashton." I reached the back door, dead-bolted it, pulled curtains closed. The singing persisted faintly. Inside, I made dinner, tried to ignore it. The rule had worked. The voice was a test. I had passed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of competence. Christine's instructions weren't nonsense. They were survival. Following them meant safety. I had been in the house 3 weeks when I heard it, the crying. I was at the kitchen table, laptop open, working on an article about sustainable farming practices. Coffee in hand, half listening to the wind outside, when it began. At first, I thought it might be pipes settling or the old furnace kicking on, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. Broken sobs, deep, full of pain, echoing from the basement. I froze, my hands hovering above the keyboard. A woman's voice, raw and desperate. Every instinct told me to run downstairs, find whoever was in distress. But Christine's fifth rule came back to me. Leave the house immediately if you hear crying from the basement. Do not return until morning. My pulse raced, fear twisting with guilt. A person in pain, and I was supposed to leave? It didn't make sense. I listened closer, trying to pinpoint the source. It moved slightly, muffled, like whoever it was knew I was listening. The sobs tugged at my chest, made me ache to help. But I reminded myself of the other strange things I had experienced. Scratches, voices, phone calls. Christine's rules had saved me every time. The basement crying was another test, just like the banging and the voices in the woods. I shut the laptop. My hands trembled as I picked up my keys. Each step toward the front door made the crying louder, more desperate, as if whoever or whatever was down there could feel my movement. The sound followed me through the kitchen, echoing up from the basement floorboards. I imagined the sobbing figure waiting for help, but I forced myself to look past the fear. Survival meant obedience. The door closed behind me, dead-bolted, curtains drawn. The sobbing continued, now echoing faintly through the walls, but I didn't turn back. I didn't look. I walked to my truck and started the engine, leaving the house behind. Even as I drove to Millbrook, 15 minutes away, I could still hear it faintly in my mind. It was haunting, human, unbearable in its sorrow. I found a motel, Pine Rest, small and functional. I checked in, told the woman at the front desk I'd locked myself out and needed somewhere until a locksmith could come. She didn't question me further. I didn't sleep well. Every time my eyes closed, I heard the crying, rising and falling in waves, desperate, broken. I wanted to go back, to check the basement, but I couldn't ignore Christine's rules. My life, my safety depended on following them. By morning, I forced myself to return. The house looked normal from the outside, peaceful as ever. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. No crying, nothing unusual. I checked the basement, light flicked on, walked down. Empty. Concrete floor, stone walls, shelves with boxes, dust settled everywhere. Nothing disturbed. Whoever had cried here the night before had left no trace. The proof was there. Christine hadn't been insane. She had survived 40 years here by observing, learning, understanding. Her rules weren't arbitrary. They were survival instructions. Following them kept me alive. Breaking them could have deadly consequences. I closed the basement door, feeling both fear and admiration. Her wisdom had become my own. Back in the kitchen, I sat at the table, staring at Christine's house rules taped to the refrigerator. 5 simple lines of cursive, but they carried the weight of decades of survival. Keep the porch light on from sunset to sunrise. Do not open windows after midnight. Let the phone ring between 2 and 3. Do not go outside or look if voices call your name after dark. Leave immediately if you hear crying from the basement. Simple words, but I'd already learned they were not suggestions. They were instructions. I ran my fingers along the paper. 40 years. Christine had survived 40 years in this house, surrounded by something I still couldn't fully explain. Scratches on door frames, strange footprints in the dirt, phones ringing when unplugged, voices calling from the woods. She had learned the limits, the boundaries, and had made peace with them. Her family must have thought she was losing touch with reality, that her rules were the ramblings of an old woman. They had no idea. I poured a cup of coffee and watched the backyard. The sun was high enough that the shadows of the trees stretched long across the grass, but the woods stayed quiet during the day. The porch light wasn't necessary now, but I kept it on anyway. Habit, or perhaps instinct. I thought about the previous owners before Christine. Had they known? Had they left because they couldn't follow the invisible rules? Maybe she was the first to truly understand. My morning was spent finishing the article about sustainable farming. Writing about crop rotation, soil health, sunlight, water, deadlines, and productivity felt almost normal here. But the quiet of the house carried a tension underneath, a reminder that the world beyond the windows wasn't quite ordinary. Some nights, it would test me. Some nights, the crying, the tapping, the voices, but I'd learned how to endure. Obedience was safety. Curiosity could be deadly. Lunch came and went, a simple sandwich at the kitchen table. The garden was slowly starting to bloom. Tiny green shoots of tomato and lettuce pushed through the soil I had turned by hand, a small reminder that life continued even here. And somewhere beyond the edge of the yard, behind the trees, voices might call. Something might move through the underbrush, testing, observing. But I knew how to respond. I didn't have to understand. I only had to obey. The irony wasn't lost on me. Protection in the modern sense meant locks and cameras. Here, it meant rules and boundaries drawn in careful cursive by an old woman who had survived what no one else could. I paused to watch the sun drop lower. Shadows lengthened, corners darkened. I checked the porch light, still on, and felt a small flicker of reassurance. As the sun touched the horizon, I realized that survival here was a partnership. I followed the rules. Whatever lived in the woods followed its own limits. The agreement was simple: obey, and you live peacefully. One misstep, one lapse in judgment, and the consequences could be severe. That thought was humbling. It reminded me that my life here was not entirely my own. I respected the boundaries, and in return, they respected mine. Dinner was simple. The sun disappeared behind the trees. The porch light flickered softly across the boards. Shadows filled the corners of the house, but I felt no fear. Following the rules meant safety. Christine had known this, and now I knew it too. The first signs of evening brought the usual tension. Shadows stretched across the kitchen floor, and the woods behind the house darkened to almost black. I finished washing the dishes and glanced at the porch light. Yellow beams spilled across the boards, cutting through the growing darkness. My hands shook slightly, not from fear exactly, but from anticipation. 6 months of living here hadn't dulled my instincts, only sharpened them. I had learned that nothing in the night was predictable. I settled in the living room with a book, the old couch sagging under me. The TV sat silent, a relic of Christine's old life, but I preferred quiet anyway. Around 10 o'clock, the first subtle noises arrived. Leaves rustled in the distance, a snap of a twig here, a soft shuffle there. My heart rate quickened, but I didn't look toward the windows or the trees. Rule 4, don't go outside or look if voices call after dark. Obedience had kept me safe, and obedience was what I followed now. Around 11, a whisper floated through the house. My name, Ashton. Just one soft call, teasingly playful. I froze mid-page, feeling the familiar chill in my spine. It was Ellie's voice, or something pretending to be her, but wrong. Musical, playful, childlike, as if enjoying a game I didn't want to play. I focused on the book, trying to block it out. Another call, closer, this time insistent. I gritted my teeth and ignored it, letting the pages pass in my hands, counting sentences, forcing myself to stay calm. Minutes stretched. The calls came faster, bouncing from left to right, echoing off the woods. I felt my hands shake as the words hit some deep, primitive part of me. I had to remember Christine's warnings. The rules weren't arbitrary, they were survival. I shifted slightly, turning the page, and the voice changed. Hurt now, disappointed. You won't come? Ashton, why won't you answer? The sing-song rhythm still underlined the words, hypnotic and unsettling. I finished my book's chapter and moved toward the kitchen to grab water, every step measured, careful not to make unnecessary noise. The cries, the laughter, the playful singing, all designed to make me look, to make me break the rules. But I didn't. I poured the water, sipped slowly, and returned to the living room. Time crawled. The sun had set hours ago. The porch light outside cast its unwavering yellow glow. Obedience, safety, boundaries, those words echoed in my mind. At 12, the calls became frantic. "Come and play!" The musical tone sharpened, angry now. "No fun, Ashton. No fun at all." Branches rustled violently, leaves scraped against the siding, and I could hear the steps moving closer. I clenched my jaw and reminded myself why I was safe. Not once did I glance outside. Not once did I hesitate. Following Christine's rules meant survival, and I had survived every test. By 1:30, the sounds began fading, retreating back into the woods. My hands were cold, my body tense, but I stayed in place, watching the porch light, listening. By 2, only the wind rustled in the treetops, and the house returned to its normal creaks and groans. I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving in a wave. The rules had held again. Safety had been preserved. I sat in silence until I fell asleep, the distant howling of something unidentifiable echoing through the night. The house was quiet, obedient in its own way. I had passed another test, and tomorrow the garden, the articles, the life I was building, all would continue as long as I respected the boundaries that Christine had set in stone. Morning light spilled through the kitchen windows, painting gold streaks across the table. My coffee steamed beside the laptop as I typed, words flowing easily. The article I was working on, home security systems, felt almost like a joke now. No alarm company could guard against what lived in those woods. Still, the irony made me smile. The rules, Christine's rules, were my true protection, and they worked better than any lock or camera ever could. Outside, the day was peaceful. Birds flickered through the trees. The air smelled clean and damp from last night's rain. Everything looked so normal, you'd never know what this land became after dark. Sometimes that contradiction amazed me, the divide between day and night, between safety and threat. By noon, I had finished my article. I leaned back and stretched, thinking about Christine. Her neat, cursive writing was still taped to the refrigerator. The edges had curled slightly, but her words stayed sharp. I had read them so many times they were etched into memory. Each rule wasn't superstition. It was logic in disguise, a code of coexistence. I thought about her years here, 40 years of night voices, scratching doors and whispered warnings. She had survived through discipline, not fear, and now I was following in her footsteps. Maybe that's why the house accepted me. It wasn't about ownership, it was about respect. After lunch, I walked into the garden. Rows of tomatoes and beans stretched in neat lines, their leaves trembling in the wind. Kneeling, I touched the soil. Warm, alive. It was strange how something so mundane could exist beside something so otherworldly. Behind the tree line, something moved. Quiet, deliberate. I didn't look up. I knew better. Instead, I planted the last seedling and whispered, "I'm not breaking the rules." The woods responded with silence. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a figure maybe, at the far edge, but it stayed still, waiting, watching. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. Inside again, I brewed tea and reread an email from my editor. She wanted another article by Friday. I smiled. Deadlines were comforting, predictable, unlike the things beyond the windows. Around 5:30, I switched on the porch light early. Habit now, security through ritual. Evening fell gently. The shadows crept back, soft at first, then heavy and consuming. But I was ready. I had followed every step, every word, every warning, and in return, the house had given me peace. Around 9, I walked from room to room, checking locks and curtains. The house creaked softly, the way old homes do when they settle into darkness. For a moment, I felt Christine's presence, calm, measured, approving. She'd made her peace with this place long before me. I whispered, "You were right, Christine." Somewhere in the distance, a soft sigh echoed through the walls, not frightening, just present. I smiled faintly. The agreement held. By 10:30, I was in bed. The porch light glowed faintly through the curtains. My last thought before sleep was simple and steady. I'm safe. Because I understand the rules. The wind stirred outside as I settled deeper under the blankets. The house was quiet now, peaceful in a way that felt earned. 6 months of following Christine's rules had turned this old, isolated home into a sanctuary. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of wind through the trees no longer set my nerves on edge. I knew the rhythm now, the boundaries, and I stayed within them. I thought about the night I first heard crying from the basement and the voice in the woods calling my name. The memory still made my stomach twist, but it also reminded me how much I had learned. Those early days had been terrifying. Now I recognized patterns, understood the subtle signals that meant it was testing me, learning whether I would obey, and I always did. Dinner was simple, roasted vegetables and bread, cooked on Christine's old stove. I sat at the kitchen table, watching the sunlight fade behind the trees. Shadows stretched long across the yard, but I didn't flinch. The garden I had planted was thriving. The first sprouts of lettuce and carrots peeked through the soil. Somehow, tending it made me feel grounded. Life went on, even with the darkness surrounding me. After cleaning up, I made tea and curled up in the living room with a book. The small television sat unused in the corner. For months, I hadn't needed it. Reading by lamplight was enough. Every so often there was a sound, a branch snapping, a low rustle, but I stayed calm. Rule 4. Ignore voices, ignore taps, ignore calls. I had mastered restraint. That was safety. Around 10:15, I checked the porch light. It glowed yellow and steady. Rule 1. My eyes wandered to the windows. Locked, curtains drawn. Rule 2. No phone calls tonight. Rule 3. All 5 rules, remembered and respected, lined up in my mind like a protective barrier around the house. The woods were quiet now, but I knew they were still alive, waiting for nightfall to resume their tests. I didn't fear them anymore. I accepted their presence. Some things didn't need to be explained. Some things simply were. And living alongside them meant respecting limits, understanding boundaries, and trusting the agreement. As midnight approached, I brushed my teeth, tucked the last stray books away, and climbed into bed. The creaks of the old house, the wind in the trees, the occasional distant howl. It was all part of the rhythm. I pulled the covers up tight and whispered to myself, I understand. I follow. I am safe. Outside, the wind rustled, shadows shifted, and the faint echo of what might have been a voice floated through the trees. But it did not disturb me. The rules were clear. Obedience was safety. Respect was survival. Christine had left more than a house. She had left knowledge, a map through a world I couldn't see but could navigate. Morning would come with light spilling through the windows, bird song and calm. But no matter what nightfall brought, I would remain. The garden would grow, the articles would get written, and I would honor the agreement that kept this house alive and me alive within it. I was home, protected, prepared. And for the first time in a long while, I felt whole. Follow them and live. Christine had understood it, and now so did I. I closed my eyes, and finally, completely, I slept.